Good afternoon and welcome to Wednesday's session of Business as Usual. I'm Audrey Russo, President and CEO of the Pittsburgh Technology Council, and joined here with me today is Jonathan Kirsting. He's Vice President of Visibility and all things media. So we are thrilled at our guest today, talking about topics that are affecting each and every one of us who work in an office, which is probably most of us who are on this call, but now we're working at many people are still working at home. So this would not be possible without Huntington Bank. So thank you so much, Huntington Bank, for the work that they've done to support small businesses. They're the largest SBA lender in Southwestern Pennsylvania. And then a couple of notes about what's coming up, just so that you have this on your calendar. Tomorrow, we're going to be joined by Pittsburgh Public Schools Superintendent Anthony Hamlet, and along with Presley Gillespie, President of Neighborhood Allies, for an update on Beyond the Laptops. And if you're not familiar with this effort, earlier this COVID season, I originally said this year, but it's the last 14 weeks, the tech sector, led largely in part by Aurora, stepped up to help raise funds to get laptops into some of the homes of low-income Pittsburgh public school students. And tomorrow we're going to talk about Beyond the Laptops and consider additional issues around connectivity. And then on Friday, we're joined by Dr. Kelly Hunt. She's District Director of the U.S. Small Business Association. She's going to outline some of the changes that Congress passed last week to help improve what is known as the PPP, the Paycheck Protection Program for small businesses. And then next week on Monday, we have John Thornton, CEO of Astrobotic, who's going to talk about the privatization of space exploration and what that means for Pittsburgh. And on Tuesday, we will be joined by Jerome Bettis, who will be talking about the work of the Bus Stops Here Foundation. So we are working each and every day to make sure that we're bringing you relevant information about what's happening all across of our ecosystem. So one thing, we've muted all your microphones if you've never been with us, and that's because we don't want to hear any background noise. And we have a chat. We hope that this will be interactive. You will be able to ask our guests questions, and just be mindful that this isn't an opportunity to sell your wares. So on that note, I'm going to jump right in, and I'm going to welcome Eric Booth. He's president of Desmone Architects, and he's joined us today to talk about topics around space and workspace in particular. So welcome, Eric. Thank you for being here. And I am going to jump in and ask you some questions. First of all, start out by telling us a quick overview of your firm and some of the projects that you've worked on, so that our guests might be familiar with some of the ways that you've impacted our community.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me, first of all. So Desmone is a full-service architecture and interior design firm. We've got offices here in Pittsburgh, Morgantown, West Virginia, and Salisbury, Maryland. Our work spans across offices, new and old buildings, apartments, hotels. We have manufacturing facilities, higher ed, institutional, and we actually even do a lot of single-family residences. We're located here in Pittsburgh at 1 Doughboy Square in Lawrenceville. So we're right behind that statue that was so shamefully desecrated a couple weeks ago, but it's all better now. And we also just put an addition onto our building. So anyone who's familiar with the neighborhood who's driven by has probably seen that. Some other projects we've worked on, we just finished up the Trip Hotel in Lawrenceville. So that was the old Washington Trade School building on 40th Street, right there in the center. It was an old school that we converted into a B2 hotel. Check it out, they got a great rooftop deck. The Warhol Museum we've worked with for many years. We've done all their renovations in the last probably 6 or 7 years. The Oakland Bakery, some of you are familiar with. We did Tech Forge in Lawrenceville, where Caterpillar is located. Alley 26, which is near you guys, in the same facility over there. We did that a couple years ago, the co-working space. Other things like 2500 Small Money, which was a Pittsburgh Magazine Ultimate House several years ago, and some current projects we're working on. We're working on a new space for Aptive, which is a really fun space down there. Really cool space that's coming together. We're converting the old Air building downtown into a boutique hotel. That's the one with all the gargoyles on top at 4th and Wood. Really cool old building. And the CCAC workforce training facility that's going to go up on the North Shore, we're also working on right now. That's in design and bidding.
Wow.
You guys busy, man. That's crazy.
Well, that's very diverse. So that's very interesting and diverse. So you're working with tech companies, you're working with workforce development, academic institutions. That's awesome.
Yep.
So most of us have heard of at least a few of those. So right now in our world, we have a bit of an uneven environment for work. So in some cases, we have companies who have never stopped working. They're actually in place and have made adaptations in compliance with COVID-19 safety. And then we have others that have been out since mid-March, working from home. So what are the trends that you're seeing as companies return to work, start to look at reconfiguring spaces for social distancing, all the things that really affect the work environment and across the different kinds of work that people do? I know that's broad brush, but it seems like you have experience across so much of that.
Yeah, and it really is broad brush because we're seeing the full gamut. I would say most of the things are really more in reactive mode. So it's like, what can we do minimal to kind of get a space that's going? And so, that could be as simple as not going into the office at all. We're doing full remote. It could be that those are in place or those are trying to reoccupy their buildings now. So that may take the form of, we're going to do shift work in order to maintain 6 feet apart from each other, in order to maintain social distancing. We're going to update our cleaning protocol. We're going to have a temperature check when you come in. We're going to actually install physical barriers. It's really been across the board. But what I found with most businesses is for those that have found that like teleworking, for example, has been effective, most of them are sticking with that and then sort of coming back into the workplace fairly slowly. And for rightfully so, I don't want to make a whole lot of physical investments, particularly since this is all really in flux. I mean, the science and all this and the best practices evolve almost daily. And week after week, we get new recommendations and new this, new that. And I think most businesses are rightfully smart to kind of hold off just a little bit, don't react too much. Because initially we're like, okay, well, the entire workplace has to change. We have to install 8-foot-high barriers between everyone and go back to cubicles.
Right.
Well, I mean, there's lots of implications of that. So like what we're doing in our office is we're doing sort of a blended approach. We've said we're encouraging teleworking because we're still able to do that. We've opened up the office and we start off with policy. So we already had a very strict cleaning policy in place, which has helped us. And so it's been a little bit easier transition for us, but even us, we're probably only about 25% still actually in the office now. Most of us are still remote.
Mm-hmm. And so what are you seeing though? Are you seeing people when they are thinking about coming into the office that they're actually putting up new kinds of barriers or different kinds of configuration?
A couple. So a couple have been reconfiguring office spaces like workstations. I'd say fewer are actually reconfiguring and more are kind of just like, okay, we're going to stay, you can't sit in this one and you can sit in this one. Instead of like actually physically reconfiguring, because that is really difficult for most people. It's expensive to install barriers.
Okay.
It's expensive to completely rearrange furniture. So if you have a normal cubicle layout, what we're seeing is that someone will say, okay, someone could sit here, you got to skip this one and then do this over here as a way of maintaining space in your interim.
Okay. So you're seeing that kind of staging.
Yes.
Right.
We're seeing some guards, coming in having like a plastic guard over the reception area or nearby, doing temperature checks, those types of things.
Mm-hmm.
Most of our clients have not done significant upgrade to their current spaces.
Mm-hmm.
Now they're thinking about what their future spaces would look like, but not doing a whole lot of significant things to their current spaces.
Are you seeing any companies that are thinking about expanding square footage per individual?
It's been discussed. It seems to go back and forth because just as we're talking about having more space for people, there's also the counter argument is, do we actually need this much physical space? Mm-hmm. If we're able to work remotely pretty decently and what it costs for us to work in an office, do we really need 10,000 square feet of space? Or could we keep 10,000 square feet of space or go to 5,000 and then just reconfigure the way that we work or do shift work and so forth and leverage these new technologies? So it's a lot of these things that the companies are really trying to weigh through right now.
Okay, well, we have a couple of questions, Jonathan. Why don't we just ask?
We got Darren Grove here. I haven't seen Darren in forever. I miss you, Darren. I'm glad you're out there. So what guidance do you have for new maximum occupancy for conference rooms? I've heard some crazy numbers as low as 2 people in a conference room.
It's based on a couple of things, but probably the rule of thumb is to make sure that you can have 6 foot between people when you're sitting in it. Okay. And so depending on the size of your room, that could eventually, that could end up being only 2 people per room if you use that standard. If you've got a really large conference room, it's maybe a little bit more. But like roughly speaking, it's like, having 2, like basically having 2 or 3 seats between you and the next person, approximately. So however that kind of works out.
So there is, I think he asked another question, Jonathan.
Yeah, so following up here. So any creative ideas for hosting workshops and collaborative sessions? I'm going to take notes on this answer, Audrey. Got my paper right here.
Yeah, I mean, I still think that the best so far has been leveraging technology, frankly. But whenever we've been able to do it with actual physical space, we've had a combination of people within the space using CAM, and then actually leveraging it with a combination of people also online. So it's actually not one physical thing, it's a combination of things.
Yeah.
That's kind of the best one. That's probably the most efficient one that we've seen so far that is also effective and achievable by most people.
Excellent.
Okay. There's another question, Jonathan.
Oh, they're rolling in. I love an active crowd here. This is fantastic. So do you think companies will be redesigning or moving into new spaces that have a chance to leverage the overhead?
What do you mean by leverage the overhead?
Let's see here.
Cost.
Pull up on that cost. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so I think it's important to remember that we're talking about like different levels of performance here. So there's very basic things of, okay, we're going to function. So right now we're largely in a state of, we need to stop pathogens. We need to protect ourselves physically. But as we move forward, we start to think about higher level goals. Like what is it to ultimately be, that's going to have us be optimized? And I think one thing that's been sort of mentioned, but it's not really been brought up too much or enough, is the impending mental toll that all this is going to take on people. So in that case, I think that the longer term thinking is to think broadly about what wellness means and what it means to essentially have healthy people. And so that goes beyond purely just physical kind of barriers. It actually has to do with creating places that allow people to thrive and be healthy. So in terms of new spaces, that means taking a critical eye to what those spaces are going to be and reminding ourselves of concepts that are not just about physical safety, you know, like distances and so forth, but also is a space going to protect like help our actual mental well-being, natural light, good ventilation systems, all those types of things. So in that case, I think it's absolutely worth it. If you're looking at new space and looking at leveraging things, and in terms of actual physical types of things, what I would focus on is going to be, first of all, the quality of the mechanical system. So having, you know, ventilation, air quality, air quality, you know, air quality has been a very big deal because we're seeing about the spread of COVID in particular is very much affected by ventilation. That is why it's usually safer to be outside than inside. And then inside spaces, it's very dependent on spatial separation and also the actual mechanical system. So I think that no matter what, COVID or not, having a better mechanical system, better ventilation, higher air quality, okay, better light quality, better access to natural light, and all these things are ultimately going to help the bottom line because they ultimately make healthier people, happier people, and more engaged workers. So I think it's absolutely worth taking a look at that from a cost perspective, whether or not we have COVID.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Another question, Jonathan, from Eric.
Yeah, so for the past several years, it seems that employers have been moving to smaller per employee type spaces. What does the future of office space hold, do you think?
I wish I had a crystal ball, and I will be honest, I kind of go back and forth on this, but I think that ultimately we're going to have to basically reassess in the mid to long term what the need for actual space is. So it has been true that we've been going for like a smaller square footage per station, which has basically meant that we've been closer together. And so what I think is going to happen is that we're going to see probably a standard emerge where it's basically to a larger size. But to compensate for that, I think we're going to see more leverage on technologies, work from home, telework strategies as a way of sort of offsetting what may be an increased overall need for space. So let's say, for example, in the past, we allowed for, you know, like a 6x or like a 5x5 or a 5x6 workstation. Okay, that may end up laying out so that we're closer than 6 feet. So if we go to a slightly larger workstation, that would increase the overall size we would need with the same number of people that are working there. But if we evaluate how many people need to be working there at once, we may find that less people need to be there at once. So we actually have less stations. And they're used in a shift form that's a little bit differently.
Eric, do you ever see a day and age when we'll have office buildings with windows that actually open?
Yes.
That'd be so awesome, wouldn't it?
Well, I mean, if you go to Europe, they've been doing these kinds of things, passive strategies and so forth for a very long time. I mean, the US is generally kind of slower to adopt these things, but certainly it's going to make a comeback to some degree. I mean, there's a lot of rubber banding effect. People sort of jump to the opposite, right? So you'll have people, all right, let's make everything operable. But then there's a lot of stuff that comes with operability. do you really, when you open that window, if you've got 4 people opening that window, your energy efficiency may significantly decrease, right? So then that could basically create a greater burden on the mechanical system or the utility expenses. So there's going to be a balance there. But certainly the idea of having operable windows, even if for the very least of allowing for greater ventilation in like a pandemic event, is certainly something I think we'll absolutely be considering. There is an
These
additional
windows
expense
are
on building.
Interesting.
So, more and more companies, including your own, have looked into adopting the well-being standards. Explain to explain to all of us what those standards are.
Sure. So so there's International Well Building Institute, and they've established a standard called WELL, W-E-L-L. And the best way I describe it is, so a lot of people are familiar with LEED, and LEED is basically a rating system for buildings and spaces that looks at how buildings impact the environment. And basically, the less impact that a building has on the environment, the greater the rating. Okay. So WELL is a similar system that looks at how buildings impact people. So the greater wellness that that can be instilled or promoted in a person, the higher the rating. So in WELL currently, there's kind of WELL certified, which is base level. There's WELL Gold, and there's WELL Platinum. And so you have preconditions, which essentially say all buildings that are WELL certified have to meet this threshold of things. There's specific requirements. They have to do across the board. Some of them are physical things like mechanical systems. A lot of them are policy, like cleaning policy, for example, or just even the way that people are treated in terms of culture. So all those basically things go into, and then there's a rating system that's developed according to how well your building or space adheres to that. And so we actually went through this process ourselves. And we were the first building in Pittsburgh to achieve WELL Gold status. And what that basically means is that we had to not only just look at like our actual physical space in terms of the lighting levels, mechanical systems, air quality, all those things that are measurable, all very important. But equally important, for example, was our cleaning policy. Our cleaning policy prior to COVID, just as basically a function of WELL, required us to have daily cleaning, and we have a checklist. And on that checklist, we have to use certain kind of products. We have certain things that have to be hit a certain way. We have UV wands, non-porous surfaces, things that basically help to prevent pathogens. We're all sort of baked into this rating system. And what sets this particular rating system different from others is that in order to achieve your certification, third-party testers come to the actual facility once it's done and physically test things. They go around with air quality monitor. They go around with light meters to actually see and verify that what you've designed is actually in place. And the other part is that it has to be renewed every 3 years. So we achieve WELL certification, but in another 2 years, 2.5 years, we will have to go through the same evaluation process to make sure we maintain it. So there's a certain level of accountability, which gets through the actual function and use of the space, not just the design.
That's good. And is there a website for this, or is there?
Yeah, if you just basically search for WELL, I think it's wellcertified.com, or do a search for WELL Buildings, International Well Building Institute, it comes up.
Very cool.
And so this applies to all construction, right? I mean, so it's not just new construction?
Currently, so version 1 has been primarily limited to office spaces, but version 2, which is currently in development, they have some pilot programs that also get into things like multifamily. So the idea eventually is that this kind of process can be applied to all buildings. And so what we've been doing ourselves is beyond kind of certification, we've been trying to look at wellness as it relates to all of our verticals. So, how can someone's personal home have wellness? But currently it's been the actual version 1 has been office buildings.
Yeah.
So in relationship to airspace, I see that Ingrid Cook has a question.
Yeah, so when it tests air quality, so there's
Right.
different levels of this. There are actually fairly inexpensive devices like Aware and a few others that basically can test for certain aspects of the air quality. Usually it's going to be temperature, CO2 levels, and so forth. Those are pretty readily available, and I think the one we use is Aware, and there's actually it usually comes with a software, and it can be real-time monitored. So the device we have actually has an actual physical thing that shows a rating, and that rating is a summary of several different factors: humidity, air temperature, so forth. And as part of our WELL certification, when that number goes below a certain thing, certain threshold, we actually have to go and investigate why that is. So those ones, and they're fairly inexpensive, probably a couple $100 at most for those kinds of systems to start off with. Higher quality air quality, testing when you actually get into commercial thing could be a little bit more, and there are actually companies out there that can do that.
So now I want you to put your crystal ball hat on, okay? And I'd like you to tell me, what do you think about, with all of us over the last 14 weeks, relying on working from home more and more? What do you think the future looks like for the built commercial environment?
I think, well, first of all, I still think it's still in flux, but if I was to guess, I think there's going to be a lot, we're not going to forget the lessons that we've learned here. In terms of a lot of folks, a lot of companies, a lot of people have found a lot of efficiencies, a lot of great things by working remotely or working through technologies like we're on right now. And so there's absolutely no doubt in my mind that those things are going to continue. At the same time, I think after a certain threshold, we're going to find that the highest, depending on the kind of business you have, that probably the highest functioning companies are going to still require some amount of physical office space. And this is because I believe that ultimately we're social animals and we need to be physically near each other after a certain degree. And so we're going to see that. And I think both of those are going to inform the other. I think that the home office, the home settings are going to be informed by what makes it more conducive to working. And I think that the workplace is going to be modeled, or it's going to be impacted by what we've learned from working at home. What were those things of working at home that really made it great to work there? Was it private space? Was it the ability to close a door? For those of us who have doors that we can close at home, and none of us have that luxury. But I think that we're going to sort of see those go back and forth. And I think wise companies are going to see how to leverage both of those to the best of their ability. And every company is going to be different. I actually foresee that some companies, there is possibility that some companies can see that they don't need any physical space. That is possible. I think they're going to be in the minority. I think most are going to be some kind of hybrid.
Well, my crystal ball is that when we're working in with things, the information of things, whether that's autonomous vehicles or robots, and it's impossible to be able to do that work without being close to things.
Correct.
And I believe that we'll probably spread out a little bit more. That's my belief in that space, and that's near and dear to what's happening here in Pittsburgh in terms of our assets. But if you look at pure tech companies like Twitter and Shopify, and who have already said you don't need to come into the office, and they're onboarding people through technology, and they're believing that you can get the best talent from anywhere in the world. So I like to say that Pittsburgh has an opportunity to attract people in terms of a destination. And then of course you have, companies that are working and doing research where they need clean rooms, and they need, environments that are absolutely required, that you have to, do controlled research, that we probably are going to expand some space in there just so that we're not in the mode of maximizing space.
Yeah.
So I do see those kinds of shifts. And the cool thing about Pittsburgh is we have a variety of those kinds of companies, so that we're not just, sort of unidimensional. But I also think that there's going to be opportunities for people to think about what does it mean to have a home office, and maybe make some investment into what is that home office environment like. Unlike me, I'm staring at my refrigerator all day, right? And probably not a good thing to do. So I think that if I could have designed something, I would have designed something a little bit different, that I don't have to put my printer on my counter.
I'd have a mini fridge there, Audrey. That way you can access the snacks without it staring you in the face.
Yeah, I don't need to stare at any more snacks. So here, do you see what Ria's saying? She's a biotech company. They've been looking at distributed workplace, which is how you continue to work at home, but make sure that there's a group team feeling.
Yeah,
so that's another good example, right?
Yes. The furniture companies like Steelcase, for example, a lot of these, a lot of the furniture companies are in kind of real crisis right now, because a lot of, their business depends on office furniture and so forth. But the progressive ones like Steelcase, Herman Miller, and so forth have been doing a lot of studies in this, and they're really trying to develop technologies that allow just that. Working with Microsoft, for example, in order to have spaces that allow more collaborative types of feel. And so there's absolutely, with any given kind of crisis, there's always opportunity, and I think we're going to see a lot of technologies emerge for that type of thing.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if you got involved in some of that. So let's see, is there another question out there? Okay, I think we.
Well, I saw that Diane mentioned about you know, sitting in a car 3 hours
Oh,
not in
yeah.
a car is much healthier.
You-
I completely agree, absolutely. And so there's a lot of, you know, we're seeing a lot of those gains, and ultimately our kind of position, generally speaking, is that healthier people make for healthier workers and a better society. And our buildings and spaces, whether they're at home or at the office, contribute to our well-being. And so wherever that works out, in whatever form that takes, ultimately it's about thinking about people first.
Right, and so what about the types of materials? Are you seeing some new trends in terms of materials?
Yeah, some of them are good and some of them are bad. So in terms of the good, essentially, so things that are easy to clean, non-porous. It's about the ability to be clean easily. You're seeing some things that have like antimicrobial surfaces. A lot of those have not been tested, and in some cases can actually be detrimental because they give the impression that like it can kill bacteria on contact, when in fact it's not been tested, and then it basically could potentially lead to people not cleaning surfaces. So the idea of having a surface that can be easily cleaned and then having a protocol to clean it is better.
You need a copper countertop for that. That's like the only thing, right?
So Eric, your team you mentioned earlier, your team, some are in the office now?
Yeah.
And some are still working from home?
Yeah, and then some of us combine. Some of us do a combination thereof. And it's that combination thereof based on the kind of work we're doing, which I think is probably what we're working on now and what's emerging. And I think is ultimately, there's a lot of opportunity there.
I think so too. I think that, what other observations do you think that you'd like to share with us that you've seen that we haven't covered yet? I mean, you've covered a lot in terms of environmental and in terms of product, in terms of space design, airflow, and some of the materials. What are some other things that maybe we overlooked?
Well, I mean, we can talk about the physical stuff all day long, and that is absolutely critically important. But I think we very first need to start with the fact that spaces are for people, and that companies are for people, and that whenever a company or an individual makes any decision, it has to be with respect to what is going to be good for the people. And so I think it starts with policy, culture, and leadership. And at that point, beyond that, in terms of actual materials, I think that the sky's the limit. I think that we're seeing an overall culture of companies that is looking at the importance of wellness of people, physically, mentally, and spiritually. And those things being going to be the differentiators, and things that at one point may have been, things that set companies apart. To me, they're absolutely essential. And I think this pandemic shows it.
And so then what about co-working space?
Yes.
Have you been involved in any design of co-working space?
Not recently. So we did Alloy 26, right? And so now there's a question of how do those spaces end up being used now? And so I really know where the jury is out on that one. I think that with proper protocol, cleaning protocol, standards, usage, and those types of things, they can still be used, but they're seriously being rethought. And there are some people that have basically been saying, all right, this is going to be the death of those. I think that the reality is somewhere in between.
You do. Yeah, I mean, I think it's partially confidence, right? Some of it's confidence and some of it is fact-based and science-based, and we'll see what happens through the summer and through the early fall.
Yes.
Are you seeing anything in terms of confidence, in terms of the people that you're talking about?
I've seen a variety of behaviors. I've seen some people that are so confident that it's almost like it doesn't exist. And I think that's a little wrong. I think vigilance is still necessary, but at the same time, I think as we learn more, we can probably take a few more risks for benefit, but my sense is that people are not quite taking it seriously enough, is what I'm observing.
And you're seeing, even as we're in the green space, that perhaps people are adhering to 25% in the office and staggered shifts. Are you seeing that?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I mean, actually, some businesses have not even opened up at all, frankly, if they're able to telework. And I mean, depending on your company, it may be that is your best strategy right now, because the risks don't, outweigh the reward doesn't outweigh the risks at this point. And so I think that's a fine strategy.
Right. Okay. Well, listen, we are right at 12:30, and I want to give huge thanks to you, Eric, for being with us and spending some time. And we will share your website. If you don't know anything about them, you should, because he's told you about all the projects that they've been involved in and the thought leadership that they've had in the community. cannot thank you enough for taking the time with us. We want to continue to have these kind of relevant conversations because so many things affect all of us. And this is just another one. So Eric, stay safe and continue to do your work and give us advice. Thank you we have your website that's out there and you can reach him that way. It's really easy. And also this afternoon, we're working diligently to make sure that we're providing relevance to all of our members and to the ecosystem. And this afternoon at 3:30, we actually have GE Healthcare that's joining us to talk about their supplier strategy. So we're very excited about that. And come back tomorrow at noon. We will continue to have these kinds of exchanges, and everyone stay safe, stay cool, and have a good rest of the day.
See you, everybody.
Thanks.
See y'all.